It was just past 2:30 in the afternoon, and the wind outside rattled the panes the way it always did in early spring. I had brewed myself a second cup of Earl Grey and was folding linens in the small, sunlit laundry room at the back of the house. Living alone didn't require much laundry, but I liked the rhythm. The folding, the smoothing, the setting things back where they belonged. After 40 years of working in a public library structure was the closest thing to prayer I had. My name is Irene Halberg. I'm 70 years old, retired now for almost a decade. I live alone in a small house just outside Bangor, Maine. It was the house my late husband built when we were both young and ambitious, and I've kept it just the way we intended. I know how the floor creaks near the pantry, how the sun shifts through the dining room window around noon, and how the daffodils outside never come up until after the last frost. These details make up the quiet rhythm of my days now. The phone rang just as I was setting the last towel on the shelf. I wiped my hands on my apron and picked it up without checking the screen. Vanessa's voice greeted me with a brightness that didn't quite land. "Hi, Mom. Guess where we're going next weekend?" I could hear the smile in her voice. I smiled back automatically. She didn't call often. Between work at the studio and Ellie's ballet lessons, she always said. Vanessa was 34 and lived in Santa Barbara now with her husband Drew and their little girl. I hadn't seen them since Christmas, though we spoke occasionally. When we did, it was usually brief, where I asked already picturing Disneyland or maybe Palm Springs. She loved places with sunshine and champagne. Carmel, she said, practically humming. "We're staying at the Shorelight. It's right on the water. The balcony looks over the cliffs." I booked the ocean suite. I leaned against the kitchen counter and tucked the phone under my ear. "That's beautiful country," I said. "I remember going there once with your father back when you were little. You screamed the whole drive down Highway 1. She laughed, said she didn't remember that, then launched into the rest. They were taking a helicopter tour on Saturday morning. Sunday would be the anniversary dinner at a Michelin star restaurant with wine pairings for each course. She described the robes in the room, the heated towel racks, the private beach. Ellie would be with Drew's parents. I smiled, but I wasn't fully listening anymore. My eyes were on the oak tree out back, swaying in the afternoon light. The trunk had split slightly last winter, but it hadn't fallen. Just enough to be noticed. That's how her voice felt now. Familiar, but changed. "It all sounds wonderful," I said. "Big celebration." "Oh yeah?" Vanessa replied quickly. "It's our anniversary." "Sort of. Drew got a huge bonus from work, so we figured why not. We've earned it." I nodded, even though she couldn't see. I didn't say anything about the fact that their anniversary wasn't for another 5 months, or that Drew worked part-time for a small design firm that was cutting hours. I didn't ask how the suite got booked, or how she had found time to organize a helicopter tour while supposedly juggling a freelance deadline. I simply listened. Her voice danced through the rest of the conversation. I chimed in where needed, asked about Ellie's dance recital, told her the peonies were starting to come up. She promised to send pictures. We said goodbye. When the call ended, I didn't move right away. The silence felt heavier than it had before the phone rang. I stared at the folded towels, suddenly unsure where to put them. I looked down at my tea. It had gone cold. Something didn't sit right. I didn't know what it was exactly, but I knew how it felt. Like a page in a book that had been dog-eared in the wrong place. It would only take a glance to go back and check, but something in me already knew what I'd find. The next morning, just after 9 o'clock, I carried my coffee into the den and opened my laptop. The birds outside were chirping louder than usual, or maybe I was just more aware of the silence between the sounds. I hadn't slept poorly, but I hadn't slept deeply either. Something in Vanessa's voice the day before had stayed with me. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it, like a violin string tuned just a bit too tight. I logged into the bank account I rarely used. It was the one I'd kept open for emergencies, the kind of emergencies where a tire blew out or Ellie needed medicine. Years ago, I'd added Vanessa as an authorized user on one of the credit cards linked to it. She had promised to use it only if absolutely necessary. I had stopped checking the statements monthly after the first year. There hadn't been much to monitor. The page loaded slowly. I sipped the coffee. It was still warm, but just barely. When the screen finally appeared, the numbers were impossible to ignore. The balance was nearly wiped. My eyes traced the first charge. Airline tickets. 2 round-trip flights from Los Angeles to Monterey Regional. Departure date this Friday, totaling almost $1,400. The next line showed a charge from Shorelight Resort. That name hit me like a stone in the chest. Vanessa had said it yesterday, laughing about the robes and ocean view. The transaction showed 5 nights ocean suite prepaid. $9,420. I scrolled down. Dinner at Marais, a high-end restaurant I recognized from a travel article. That alone was $800. The next entry was for a car rental. Not just any car. A luxury SUV from a boutique agency near the Carmel airport. Another $1,200. There were smaller charges too: spa services, champagne delivery, parking fees, something called Cloud Luxe photography. I stopped counting. My eyes kept following the line items even as my brain caught up to what they meant. Each charge was a breadcrumb in reverse, a trail leading away from me. My daughter's voice echoed in my memory, chirpy and carefree, describing the trip like it was some earned reward. Except she hadn't earned it. Not financially. Not honestly. She had used the card. My card. Without asking. The room around me hadn't changed, but something in it felt foreign. The mantle with the framed picture of Vanessa holding Ellie in a pumpkin patch. The ceramic mug that read "World's Best Mom." They all sat in the same place. Only now they looked like props from a play I wasn't in anymore. My hands stayed on the keyboard. My mouth never opened. The screen flickered as it refreshed, displaying a new email. My monthly statement, as if to confirm everything I had just seen. The numbers were neat, clean, unapologetic. They weren't hiding anything. They didn't need to. I sat back and let the coffee go cold. It wasn't just the money. It was the decision. The quiet, entitled decision to take what wasn't offered. That was the part that caught in my throat. That was the part that stayed. It was 10:15 when I opened the notebook I kept in the second drawer beneath the coffee filters. It was old, leather-bound, and lined with names and numbers I hadn't used in years. Most people used apps. I used a pen. I flipped to the back where I once jotted down Vanessa's travel agent, then scanned the credit card statement beside me. One by one, I started calling. The woman at the Shorelight Resort answered on the second ring. I gave her the reservation number, confirmed the last 4 digits of the card, and told her I was canceling the ocean suite. She hesitated, said the booking was non-refundable within 72 hours. I told her that was fine. She offered a 50% credit toward a future stay. I declined. The line went quiet, except for typing. By 10:40, I was speaking to a man at Monarch Luxe Rentals. The Escalade Vanessa had reserved was scheduled to be picked up that Friday afternoon. He asked if I wanted to change the vehicle instead. I told him I didn't want a downgrade. I wanted nothing. He said there would be a cancellation fee. I said I understood. Blue Pacific Tours was next. They offered aerial views of the California coastline at sunrise. Vanessa had paid in full for a 2-person private flight. I canceled it without blinking. I didn't ask if they'd notify her. I didn't care. Each call felt cleaner than the last. No yelling, no dramatics, just facts, transaction numbers, clear requests, confirmation emails. I took a sip of water after the final call and closed my laptop. The sunlight had shifted on the kitchen tiles. Outside, the wind picked up. I walked slowly to my office, opened the banking app, and navigated to the Authorized Users tab. Her name sat there. Vanessa Marie Halberg. I tapped Remove. The system asked if I was sure. I clicked Yes. There was no rush of adrenaline, no satisfaction from revenge, just a sense of balance clicking quietly back into place, like a crooked painting being nudged back to center. The same calm I used to feel shelving books alphabetically for the 3rd graders who couldn't reach. That evening I made soup from leftover carrots and leeks. I added extra time. I listened to Billie Holiday on the old Crosley in the corner. The vinyl had a scratch during track 4, but I let it play through. I lit a lavender candle. Not to relax, just to mark the hour. I climbed into bed at 9:20. The room was dark, the sheets cool. I reached for the light but paused, letting my eyes adjust to the shadows. There were no new messages, no missed calls, only the steady quiet of a house I had kept standing through storms much worse than this. Just before I fell asleep, I thought, she used my name to buy her fantasy. I used the same name to end it. Then I turned out the light, and I slept. Not from exhaustion, from peace. The first post came 2 days later. My neighbor Ellen mentioned it over the fence while trimming her rose bushes. She said something about a story going around on Facebook. Something about a daughter being cut off by her controlling mother. I nodded politely, said I hadn't heard, and went back to watering the basil. That night I opened Vanessa's profile. I hadn't visited it in months. The first image showed her sitting on the edge of a motel bed, eyes red, makeup smudged. The caption read, "When your own mother cancels your vacation without warning, just to remind you she still controls your life." The next photo was of a crumpled reservation email. Below that, a block of text in white over black. I grew up with strings attached to everything. Love came with conditions. Money came with guilt. The comments were full of sympathy. People who knew her vaguely. College friends. One of her Pilates instructors. They called me toxic, manipulative, emotionally cold. One woman suggested she cut ties completely. Another said she should seek legal advice. At 8:45 the next morning, a courier arrived with an envelope that felt too thick to be anything good. I signed for it and sat at the kitchen table, the edges of the paper cutting slightly into my fingers as I pulled it open. Vanessa was suing me for emotional distress, financial manipulation, and breach of verbal agreement. The language was inflated, weaponized. She wanted damages, legal fees, a court order for the return of access to the card. I read the entire thing twice. Then I walked into the study and opened the fireproof box beneath the cedar chest. Inside were the files I kept, not because I needed to, but because old librarians never forget the value of records. I lined them up across the dining table. Folders labeled tuition, medical, auto, rent. Each one with copies of checks, bank transfers, letters of recommendation I wrote for her when she applied to internships and couldn't be bothered to meet the deadline herself. I kept going. Her wedding deposit, her maternity leave support, the private kindergarten application for Ellie, the emergency dental surgery when she cracked a molar and didn't have insurance. I totaled it all in my head. The number wasn't exact, but it was close enough. $192,460. None of it repaid. None of it requested back. That evening I made a phone call to Daniel Mays, my attorney of 17 years. I asked to update my will. He knew not to ask why. I sat across from him the next morning at 10:15. I brought the files. I brought the letter. I brought the truth. I no longer want Vanessa listed as a beneficiary, I said. Everything goes to Jordan. Jordan was my great-nephew. He was 20 and studying nursing at a community college in Rockland. He had never asked for money. He once drove 2 hours to shovel my driveway after a storm without being asked. When I gave him $20, he handed 10 back and said he only wanted enough to cover gas. Daniel hesitated. "Are you sure you want to make it permanent?" I looked at the folders on the table. "Yes, I'm sure." He adjusted his glasses, pulled the forms, and began writing. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because I couldn't reward entitlement any longer, not even from my own child, especially not from her. That night I sat by the window with a glass of orange blossom tea. The house was quiet except for the soft tick of the old mantel clock. A different kind of peace settled in my chest. Not happiness, not pride, just clarity. I had carried guilt like a second spine for years, but it ended with this decision. If protecting what I built makes me the villain in someone else's story, so be it. I'd rather be the villain with boundaries than the hero they bankrupt. It arrived on a Tuesday. The sun was still low, filtering through the kitchen window, catching dust in its beam. I almost didn't see the envelope on the porch bench. It had no return address, just my name in handwriting I hadn't seen since Vanessa's high school graduation. I opened it slowly with the letter opener my husband had once given me for Christmas. The paper inside was soft, the ink slightly smudged in places. She had written it by hand. 4 full pages. She didn't beg. She didn't defend. She wrote that Drew had convinced her the lawsuit would scare me into submission, that he had insisted it was only fair that I owed her for years of emotional absence. But something broke in her when she saw my response silent, direct, and unmoved. She wrote that it made her look at herself. Really look. She had started working part-time at a bookstore. She had opened a small account in her name. She had left Drew. The letter didn't ask for forgiveness. It didn't try to rewrite the past. It simply said, "I'm sorry. I didn't understand what you gave up for me. I see it now." I folded the pages and walked upstairs to the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed. I opened it and placed the letter beside a manila envelope labeled Vanessa 1994. Inside was a stick figure drawing of a house with a crooked chimney and 2 women holding hands. One was taller in a blue dress. I had kept it for 30 years. I closed the chest gently. That evening I set the letter and the drawing in a memory box lined with soft cotton, not because I had forgiven, but because I had not forgotten. I poured myself a small glass of sherry and sat on the porch. The wind was light. The peonies had started to bloom again. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I didn't tell anyone the letter had come. Some things were better held quietly. They grew more real that way. Healing wasn't about mending what had snapped. It was learning to carry it with grace, and in that moment I did.